Fire crews in California have a lot of experience fighting wildfires, but they had never seen the countryside explode into flames.
Take a look at this. Up on top of this hill, there used to be a house up there, but the flames raced right up the hillside.
It may stay like that for a couple of days simply because there's red flag warnings.
405 freeway.
Wow, look at this.
A fiery.
A dangerous storm of hot embers raining down on crews as they walk a
This is
gauntlet
the Dixie
of
fire in Northern California.
From above.
Tinderbox conditions out in California, fueling a wildfire in Mariposa
New
County.
images tonight of a fast-moving fire in Mariposa County. The fire is now forcing evacuations and spreading homes. No end in sight. The fire started early this afternoon and it's spread around the side.
California is known for its attractive lifestyle. Its beaches, tech, and entertainment makes the Golden State a center of diversity and culture. However, it's also the center for wildfires, as California is a state that is uniquely fire-prone, with wildfires becoming more common and deadlier each year. It leaves millions of Californians and those on the West Coast learning how to live with fire.
California fires are really interesting in the fact that the state is just different from a lot of others. We have, a massive economy that rivals other nations. We have a huge population density in a very fire-prone state. So that all coalesces into this interesting space where we have a lot of people at risk. We often have a good chunk of money to try to deal with that risk. And we also have a lot of fire events. So, California is the birthplace of some of our biggest fire programs, things like the Incident Command System, emergency response. That was all trialed in Southern California, dealing with fire events, because California has this massive history of being a very fire-prone state. So when you look at it from that angle, as compared to the other Western 11 states, we've got even Washington and Oregon, most of their population is on the west side. Most of their population is on the wetter side of the state. So when they burn, they're more rural fires. And in California, we have a lot more of these fire events where they flow into cities or into really developed areas, and just the impact of fires can be felt really differently. So that's something maybe particularly unique about California, not necessarily in comparison to the rest of the world, right? A lot of Canada and Australia are also very fire-prone states. A number of the Mediterranean states in Europe are coming online. Africa has a lot of fires. Russia, so there's many other states and contexts. But as far as the US goes, that's what kind of makes California quite a bit interesting.
I think one major confusion is that people think that we're getting a lot less rain, and so that's what's causing there to be more fires. But it's not really that. It's that it's warmer, and so then the atmosphere can hold more water vapor, so it can dry out fuels easier. And so it doesn't even matter that much that precipitation basically is not changing. It's that you're still getting drier fuels because it's hotter in the summer. California is particularly vulnerable to wildfires because it's one of these locations where it's wet enough to have vegetation to burn, but then dry enough during part of the year so that it can burn. So some locations you picture like deserts with just sand, it's dry enough for wildfires, but it's not wet enough to have anything to burn. In other locations like rainforests, it's wet, there's enough fuel to burn, but it's too wet to burn. But California has this unique situation where it rains in the winter, and so then you can have this vegetation, these forests, but then we have this long stretch in the summer where we're basically in this dry spell every single year. And so then we have this fire season in July and August and September, where you have very dry fuels and a lot of vegetation, and you get a lot of fires. And we're seeing that portion of the season get hotter and drier, and so that's a big reason why we've seen increases in wildfires over time. As the atmosphere gets warmer, it can hold more water vapor, and so that has some implications for a lot of different weather systems. So for hurricanes, for example, it means that when you get a hurricane, it rains more than it would otherwise. So basically, each degree Celsius warming, you get at least 7% more rain in hurricanes. In other places of the world, like in dry places like the Western United States, That same phenomena of the atmosphere being able to hold more water vapor can make it drier actually instead of wetter. So when you don't have water to go into the atmosphere, the fact that the atmosphere is hotter and drier, that means that it can suck more water out of fuels, out of vegetation for fires, and so actually make fires worse at the same time. So those are two kind of contradictory sounding things that are actually totally reconcilable and from the same phenomena of that as it gets warmer, the atmosphere can hold more water, and so that means drier land surfaces in some locations and more rain in other locations.
Wildfire in general is kind of this captivating phenomena to study because it is this thing that comes across landscapes and really has this dual purpose to it, right? It can be perceived very differently by different people. Wildfire can be seen as a source of rebirth and rejuvenation. That's the role it plays in a lot of natural landscapes, right? It also could be seen as this really bad force or disastrous force that comes through these powerful storms that create their own weather. It's this really dynamic and chaotic space, which from an emergency services standpoint can be really hard to respond to, right? For firefighters and for our emergency professionals that are trying to evacuate people. So I think that's the most interesting or captivating thing about fire for me is that it can be so inconsistent, so volatile, and that creates a number of different stressors on different communities and different organizations to really figure out how are we going to adapt to this into the future. So it provides this opportunity for a lot of interesting questions to figure out how are we going to help people and how are we going to adapt.
There was a post in like our local town Facebook group that was like, oh my God, there's a fire at the campground. I was just there having lunch, and like pictures of these little puffs of smoke at the campground. And so I got to my husband, I'm like, hey, there's a fire at the campground. We look at the sky and it looked fine. Like we couldn't smell it. Sometimes, you can smell it, you can see the haze, whatever. And it was fine. Then it was maybe another 45 minutes or so after that the wind shifted. And then all of a sudden there was this huge orange column of smoke directly above our house. Our house, from what we can tell, probably went up 2 or 3 hours after we left. We found out for sure the next morning that it was gone. It was 2 or 3 days after because there were still hot spots and like it was literally smoking, like still smoking. And it was, when I say that there was nothing left, like you see, sometimes you'll see like a section of brick wall or like a chimney or something. There was literally nothing. Like you could see where like the furnace and the water heater like were kind of a taller pile, but there was literally nothing.
August 16th, 2020, I woke up around 2 a.m. And before I went to bed, it was clear skies. When I woke up at 2 a.m, it was the most intense wind I've ever seen up here. The skies were completely covered with clouds, and you could just see lots of flashing in the skies. The trees were just getting blown left and right. There wasn't one clear direction the way the wind was blowing. It was almost just like a cyclone. It was just really intense. So I went outside, and there was just lightning strikes happening over and over and over again. It was like nonstop for like hours. I tried to get some sleep if I could. We woke up around 5 a.m. to the smell of smoke. So we knew that a fire had started somewhere, but we weren't sure where. We weren't being evacuated yet. There was 3 days up until an actual evacuation call happened. It was so intense up here with smoke, it was hard to see. The sky went from orange from the previous day to now a very dark burnt orange. Reports that there's now fires on Braymore Drive. Braymore Drive is at the top of Jamison Creek Road, about a mile into Empire Grade. So Braymore is about 3 miles from my house. Okay, that's within 10 minutes now that there's fires gotten so much closer. I just didn't even think twice. I took everything that we had packed into our car. I threw it out. I just threw it out. And I got back in my car, and I've never driven so fast in my life, man. I swear to God, I'm putting my car to the limit. I'm going about like 90 miles an hour, like average. So I'm peaking 100 in places, and I'm going around corners as fast as I can. I finally reached Bonnie Doon at around 3 a.m, and there's a huge trail of cars coming down. Empire grade. So the entire community is now being evacuated, just like they probably should have been a long time ago. So it's seriously, it's like a mass exodus coming down the mountain. Somehow my dad could recognize my car, and I recognized his because he's pulling the horse trailer, right? We have our horses on board and everything. So I turn around and I was like, wow, what, you know, like what's going on? And I've never seen my dad look so crazy. This is a man who was a firefighter at once himself, just a pretty rugged guy. And he just said we had to get the hell out of there because he said it sounded like how do you describe it? A jet engine or like an enormous train or something.
The night before our fire, my wife and I had gone to bed at our usual time, and we'd heard news reports of a small fire 15, 20 miles away near the town of Calistoga. We thought nothing of it. It was not even the top of the newscast. It was 20 minutes down the newscast. And, we went to bed that night. She got up, looked out the window, and said, the neighborhood's full of smoke. I walked in my neighborhood, got in here about 8 the next morning. Probably the strangest thing I ever have or ever will experience. And it just looked like a nuclear bomb had gone off. It was just leveled. It was nothing but ash and toothpick trees sticking up and some chimneys and some stainless steel I-beams that had been, part of the structure of these homes. Even as I turned the corner onto our street, even though I could see for a half mile around that there was nothing, I had this weird hope that maybe I would turn onto my block and see my house still standing down at the end of it. Just this weird, irrational kind of dreaming hope that was the case. And I didn't quite really believe what had happened until I was standing directly in front of my house, and it was obliterated. When I wrote a fire story starting in 2017, right after the fire, I didn't think of it as a book about climate change. And in the time since, I've come to think of it as very much one. I think it's a book about living in a climate changed world. I mean, the year after 2017, my wildfire was the most destructive wildfire in California history, all of California history, until 2018, when there was a more destructive wildfire. In 2019, there was a more destructive wildfire. These aren't records that you want to see broken every year. They shouldn't be broken every year, and they are being broken almost every year. There's something bigger, worse. The whole western half of North America, not just the United States, but Mexico, Canada, and the United States, just seems to be getting drier and crisper. The Colorado River's running out of water. This is something we're going to have to learn how to live with, adapt to, or just deal with. And I think of my book as a very early entry into the literature of what that world is going to be like. Unintentionally, I didn't mean it to be that, but I think that's what it is. And I think we're looking at decades to come of adjustment and shifting. I was talking to a county supervisor. In fact, I interviewed him for the book, and he said something that really stuck with me. He said, people talk about the new normal, like the new normal is some kind of new environment, some kind of, drier, hotter environment. That's the new normal people talk about. He said, I don't think that's the new normal. He said, I think the new normal is us. The new normal is how we respond to that environment. It's how we prepare for it, how we prepare for disasters, how we respond and rebuild, how resilient we are in the face of disaster, how prepared we are. That's the new normal. And that really struck with me. That resonated. That made sense and fit with my experience too. I think the new normal isn't the environment. I think the new normal has to be us.
The wind, the wind,